All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. We're going to jump right into it today. Ready for another deep dive into some UPSC current affairs.
Absolutely. Let's get started.
Today is April 3rd, 2025.
Yeah.
And this is part 2. So as always, remember that some of these topics we might have touched upon in our previous deep dives.
Sounds good. A little bit of revision never hurts, right?
Exactly. So today we're going to be covering everything from space exploration. We're going to be talking about India's economy, some defense advancements, and of course, international relations. You know, the usual suspects, all crucial for those UPSC aspirations.
Definitely. A lot to unpack there.
Yeah, so let's jump right in. Starting with a bit of a journey beyond Earth's atmosphere. Have you heard about this FRAM-2 mission?
Oh, yeah, the one with SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft, right?
Yeah, that's the one. And they're planning on conducting the first ever X-ray experiment in space.
That's a pretty big deal, isn't it? I mean, imagine all the new insights we could get into the universe.
Absolutely. And it's not just all serious science stuff either. They're also doing this experiment, trying to cultivate mushrooms in microgravity.
Mushrooms in space.
Yep. Seems kind of random, right? But, you know, it makes you think, right, about sustaining life, maybe even long-term space missions.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. It's all connected.
Exactly. And speaking of connections, space missions like this, they rely on specific paths around the Earth. And one of them is Earth's polar orbit. So for our UPSC folks out there, what exactly is that and why should they care?
Well, a polar orbit is essentially when a satellite passes over or near the North and South poles. Usually there's a little wiggle room, maybe a deviation of about 10 degrees. But the key thing is that it's covering those polar regions.
And these orbits, are they like way out there?
Not really. They're typically between 200 and 1,000 kilometers high. So we're talking about low Earth orbit.
Low Earth orbit, got it. But what's so special about these polar orbits? What makes them so important?
Well, imagine this. The satellite's going from pole to pole, right? But the Earth underneath it is spinning. So eventually, that single satellite gets to see pretty much the entire planet.
So it's like getting a full scan of Earth, bit by bit.
Exactly. And that's why they're so useful. We use them for all sorts of things.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, for one, weather forecasting. Polar orbits give us constant data, which helps us track weather systems, understand climate patterns, and all that.
Makes sense. Global view for a global issue.
Right. And then there's mapping. High-resolution stuff, really detailed, useful for urban planning, managing resources, even disaster response.
Oh, yeah. I can see how that'd be super helpful.
And then, of course, there's the whole national security angle. You know, spy satellites, they rely heavily on polar orbits.
So those are some pretty big advantages. But are there any downsides to launching into a polar orbit?
Well, yeah, one major one. Unlike launches near the equator, where you can use Earth's rotation to get a little boost, polar orbits don't have that luxury.
So they need more fuel.
Yeah, you need a lot more fuel to get up there. It's definitely more energy intensive.
Interesting trade-off. Now, going back to the FRAM-2 mission for a sec, our source doesn't specifically say what kind of orbit it's in. But based on what it's doing, the X-ray experiment, the Earth observation, do you think it's a polar orbit?
It's possible, yeah. I mean, if they're looking at Earth, collecting data from all over, a polar orbit would make a lot of sense.
It's like putting the pieces together, right?
Exactly.
Now, we also came across some other types of Earth orbits, EO, SSO, MEO, geostationary. Just for clarity, can you give us a quick rundown of what they are and what they're mainly used for? UPSC loves these kinds of details.
Of course. So ILEO, low Earth orbit, that's anything up to 2,000 kilometers. It's a very popular spot. Used for satellite imaging, communications, Earth observation, all sorts of things. Even the International Space Station is up there.
So lots going on in LEO, got it.
Yeah, very busy up there. Then there's SSO, sun-synchronous orbit. It's a specific type of LEO, usually between 600 and 800 kilometers.
Sun-synchronous, what's so special about that?
Well, these satellites, they're in sync with the sun, meaning they pass over the same spot on Earth at roughly the same local time every day.
Oh, so it's always the same lighting conditions.
Exactly. And that makes them perfect for things like tracking land use changes, ice melt, weather patterns. Consistency is key.
Makes sense. What about MEO and geostationary?
MEO, or medium Earth orbit, that's between 2,000 and 36,000 kilometers. Satellites there, they have a lot of different uses, like navigation, some communications. Think of things like the European Galileo system.
Okay.
And then there's geostationary orbit, which is way out there, 35,786 kilometers above the equator.
That's pretty specific.
Yeah, it has to be that exact height so the satellites can rotate with the Earth. Basically, they stay in the same spot above us.
Ah, that's why they're called geostationary. They're stationary relative to the ground.
You got it. That makes them great for things like constant communication, weather monitoring, GPS. Like our Indian National Satellite System uses this orbit.
So all these orbits have their own specialties.
Exactly. It all depends on what you want the satellite to do.
All right, moving on from space to something a little closer to home, India's economy. A finance ministry report highlighted a recent increase in our external debt. Anything to worry about?
Well, let's look at the numbers first. As of December 2024, India's external debt stood at $717.9 billion. That's a 10.7% jump from December 2023.
That sounds like a lot. Is this a sign of trouble?
Not necessarily. The finance ministry says the main driver behind this increase is what they call the valuation effect. Basically, the US dollar got stronger compared to the Indian rupee.
So it's more about the exchange rate than actual borrowing.
Right. The rupee value of our dollar-denominated debt increased, even though the amount we borrowed might not have changed much.
Okay, that makes sense. What about other key indicators? The debt-to-GDP ratio, for example.
So that saw a small uptick from 19.0% in September 2024 to 19.1% in December. Long-term debt went up a bit, short-term debt decreased a tiny bit. Most of our external debt is still in US dollars, and the cost of servicing that debt actually decreased slightly.
So a bit of a mixed bag then.
You could say that.
Now, I know a lot of our listeners are still learning about economics. Could you explain what external debt actually means and where it comes from?
Sure. External debt is simply the total amount of money that our government, our companies, even individuals owe to lenders outside of India.
Okay, so anyone in India borrowing money from outside.
Exactly. A lot of this comes in the form of external commercial borrowings, which are usually in foreign currencies like the US dollar or SDRs. Those are the special drawing rights created by the IMF.
And who are these foreign lenders?
Could be foreign banks, international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank, even other countries.
So given this rise in external debt, what are the potential challenges India needs to watch out for?
There are a few. For one, if the rupee weakens against the dollar, that makes repaying the debt a lot more expensive. Secondly, if inflation stays high, interest rates might go up, which can slow down economic growth and make it harder to manage the debt.
So we need to keep an eye on the rupee and inflation.
Absolutely. And then there's the global situation. Things like global stagflation could affect our exports and make it harder to earn the foreign currency we need to service the debt.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It really is.
So what can we do to manage this rising debt?
The finance ministry report suggests a few things. One is to diversify our currency transactions. We're so reliant on the US dollar. We need to explore borrowing more in Indian rupees, especially long-term.
Reduce the dollar dependency. Makes sense.
Right. Another thing is to borrow responsibly. Make sure the money is going towards investments that will benefit the economy in the long run, not just quick fixes.
So invest in the future, not just consume today.
Exactly. And of course, we need strong economic growth. Policies that support that, things like the Make in India initiative, are essential for increasing our exports and strengthening our finances.
A lot to consider there. But let's move on to something a bit more positive. Defense. We saw some news about India's defense exports hitting a record high. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, this is good news. In the financial year 2024 to 2025, India's defense exports crossed 23,622 crore rupees. That's a 12.04% increase compared to the previous year.
That's a pretty big jump. What's behind this success?
Well, it's a combination of things. Firstly, the global market is recognizing the quality and competitiveness of Indian-made defense equipment.
So Made in India is making a mark globally.
Absolutely. And this aligns with our goal of increasing self-reliance in the defense sector. There's been a 174% increase in indigenous production from 2014 to 2015 to 2023 to 2024, which is fantastic.
So we're becoming less dependent on imports for our defense needs.
Precisely. We're on track to hit 3 lakh crore rupees in defense production and 50,000 crore in exports by 2029. That's the target we've set for ourselves.
Ambitious but achievable.
I think so. In the last year, 92% of the defense contracts signed by the Ministry of Defense went to Indian companies, which shows you the scale of our capabilities.
That's great news.
Yeah. And another positive trend is the growing role of the private sector. They accounted for over 15,000 crore rupees of those exports, so they're becoming a real force in this sector.
And what are we exporting exactly?
It's a pretty diverse portfolio now. Everything from bulletproof jackets to Dornier aircraft, Chetak helicopters. You name it, we're probably making it.
This all sounds very encouraging, but are there any challenges we need to overcome? I mean, nothing's perfect, right?
Of course. One thing we need to look at is the performance of our defense public sector undertakings, the DPSUs. While their exports did go up last year, their overall production is still lagging behind the private sector.
So there's room for improvement in terms of efficiency.
Definitely. Another challenge is technology. We still rely on imports for some major systems, critical parts, and raw materials. We need to deepen our technological expertise in these areas.
So self-reliance also means technological independence.
Absolutely. And then there's the usual challenge of making sure policy translates into action quickly. Bureaucracy can sometimes slow things down, and we need to address that.
So what are we doing to overcome these challenges and keep this momentum going?
Well, several initiatives are already in place. Programs like Make in India are crucial. They encourage domestic production and strengthen our defense industry. We also have the Defense Testing Infrastructure Scheme, which helps companies get their products tested and certified.
So building up the infrastructure, the ecosystem.
Exactly. And then there are initiatives like IDEX, which stands for Innovations for Defense Excellence, and the MAKE projects, which focus on encouraging innovation and research.
So we're investing in R&D, trying to come up with our own cutting-edge technologies.
That's right. We also have things like SRN, which aims to indigenize technology, and the setting up of defense industrial corridors to boost production.
So it's a multi-pronged approach, tackling it from different angles.
Exactly. And we've made some important policy changes too, like liberalizing FDI norms in defense, making it easier to do business.
So creating a more welcoming environment for foreign investment.
Exactly. So a lot of positive things are happening.
It sounds like it. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the Indian diaspora and our engagement on the international stage. A recent committee report brought up some important points about the diaspora. What were some of the key takeaways?
So this report was from the Standing Committee on External Affairs, and it looked at various aspects of the Indian diaspora, which, as of January 2024, stood at about 35.42 million people. That includes NRIs, PIOs, and OCIs.
So we're talking about a significant number of people.
Absolutely. And the committee had a few key recommendations. One of the concerns was the slow processing and limited issuance of OCI cards.
OCI, that's the Overseas Citizen of India card, right?
Yes. The committee suggested speeding things up, using social media and reaching out to diaspora organizations to ensure everyone who's eligible gets their OCI card by December 2025. They also said that the working group that looks at this issue should meet more often, maybe twice a year, to see how things are progressing.
So streamline the process and make it more efficient.
Exactly. Another point they raised was the voting rights of NRIs. Right now, if you're an NRI and you're registered to vote, you have to be physically present in India to cast your vote.
Which is a big ask for people living abroad.
Right. So they're looking into using the electronically transmitted postal ballot system, or ETPBS, to allow NRIs to vote from overseas.
So making it easier for them to participate in our democracy.
Exactly.
Were there any other pressing issues related to the diaspora that the report highlighted?
Yes, a few. They brought up the fact that very few Indian prisoners have been transferred back to India from foreign jails in the last 3 years. Only 8, actually. So they urged the government to work harder on this, improve the process, and make sure Indians imprisoned abroad are treated fairly.
So advocating for the rights and well-being of Indian citizens, no matter where they are.
Precisely. And finally, they talked about the immigration bill. There have been a lot of cases of illegal immigration, but the bill to address this has been stuck for a long time. The committee said we urgently need to update our laws and replace that old 1983 Act and the newer 2024 bill.
So a call for action to bring our laws up to speed with the current realities.
Exactly.
Shifting to a broader perspective on international relations, there were some recent comments from the Chinese president marking the 75th anniversary of India-China relations. What was the tone of those remarks?
Well, in his message, he called India and China ancient civilizations, major developing countries, and important members of the global south. It sounded pretty friendly on the surface.
Diplomatic speak, as they say. But we all know there's a lot more to this relationship. What are some of the key issues that continue to strain ties between the two countries?
Oh, there are quite a few. The big one, of course, is the unresolved border along the line of actual control, the LAC. It's 3,488 kilometers long, and we still don't have a mutually agreed upon boundary, which has led to military standoffs in the past.
A long-standing point of friction.
Indeed. And then there's China's Belt and Road Initiative. The BRI, particularly the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, which passes through territory that India claims, it's seen as a strategic move by China, and India is wary of encirclement.
So a geopolitical rivalry in addition to the border dispute.
Exactly. And then there's the economic imbalance. India imports a lot more from China than it exports, and our trade deficit with them has been widening. It reached $85.1 billion in the last financial year, which is a serious concern.
A significant imbalance.
Yes. And then there's China's ongoing support for Pakistan, both militarily and economically, which further complicates things for India from a security perspective.
A complex web of issues, for sure. So, given all these challenges, what's the way forward for India and China?
Well, both sides agree that finding a solution to the border issue is crucial. That's where diplomacy comes in, through things like border personnel meetings and the working mechanism for consultation and coordination.
So keeping the lines of communication open.
Right. And then there's the economic front. We need more balanced trade and investment between the two countries. Right now, it's heavily tilted in China's favor.
Leveling the playing field, so to speak.
Exactly. But beyond that, it's really about rebuilding trust. Both sides need to show sensitivity to each other's concerns and find common ground based on mutual respect and shared interests.
Building a relationship on a more solid foundation.
Exactly.
Now, on a more positive note, there were some recent developments in our relationship with Chile. Tell us about those.
Yeah, the Indian Prime Minister and the Chilean President had some productive talks recently. They signed a letter of intent on Antarctica cooperation, acknowledging Chile's role as a key access point for India's research activities there.
So working together in the scientific domain.
Yes. They also agreed to start an India-Chile cultural exchange program, and Chile announced that it would observe National Yoga Day on November 4th.
That's a nice touch, a bit of cultural diplomacy.
Indeed. And on the disaster management front, there was a memorandum of understanding signed between our National Disaster Management Authority and Chile's National Service for Disaster Prevention and Response.
Sharing knowledge and best practices in dealing with disasters.
Right. And finally, they agreed to cooperate on mining, with an agreement between Hindustan Copper Limited and Codelco, Chile's national copper corporation.
So strengthening ties across a range of sectors.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's move on to some other important developments. We came across this initiative called SAMARTH Udyog Bharat 4.0. What is that all about?
SAMARTH Udyog Bharat 4.0, they also call them SAMARTH centers, is all about pushing India into the era of Industry 4.0.
Industry 4.0, that's the whole digital revolution in manufacturing, right?
That's it. So under the scheme for enhancement of competitiveness in the Indian capital goods sector, the Ministry of Heavy Industries and Public Enterprises has set up 4 of these smart advanced manufacturing and rapid transformation hubs.
And what do they do, these hubs?
Well, their main goal is to help industries, especially MSMEs, to understand and implement the principles of Industry 4.0.
So things like AI, IoT, robotics, all that stuff.
Exactly. They provide training, raise awareness, basically get everyone up to speed with the latest technology and how to use it effectively.
So preparing our workforce for the future of manufacturing.
That's the idea.
All right, shifting focus now. There was some news about Malaysia. What happened there?
Unfortunately, there was a gas pipeline burst in a place called Putra Heights in Selangor. Apparently, there were some injuries.
That's terrible. Just to refresh our memory, could you give us a quick overview of Malaysia, its location, its geography, and maybe a few key political features?
Sure. Malaysia is in Southeast Asia, just north of the equator. It's kind of unique because it's divided into 2 main parts by the South China Sea. You've got peninsular Malaysia to the west and East Malaysia on the island of Borneo.
Okay, divided by the sea. Interesting.
Yeah. It shares land borders with Thailand, Indonesia, and Brunei. And it has maritime borders with Singapore, the Philippines, and Vietnam.
So strategically located. What about its geography?
It's pretty diverse. You've got Mount Kinabalu, which is the highest peak, and important rivers like the Rojang, Kinabatangan, and Pahang.
Okay, got it.
Politically, it's a federal constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary system. The head of state is the king, called the Yang di Pertuan Agong, who is elected from among 9 hereditary Malay rulers.
So unique blend of traditional monarchy and modern democracy.
Exactly.
The Taiwan Strait was also in the news. What's been happening there?
Well, China recently conducted new military drills in the central and southern parts of the strait. They called it Strait Thunder 2025A.
And just to clarify for those who might not know, what exactly is a strait?
A strait is basically a narrow passage of water that connects 2 larger bodies of water. In this case, the Taiwan Strait separates mainland China from the island of Taiwan, connecting the South China Sea to the East China Sea.
And this is a pretty important waterway, right?
Hugely important. It's a major shipping route, and something like 44% of the world's container traffic passes through it.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. And it's also politically sensitive. There's this line that runs down the middle of the strait, sometimes called the Median Line or the Davis Line, which some people see as a de facto maritime border.
But China doesn't recognize that, right?
No, they don't. They see Taiwan as part of their territory. So any military activity in the strait is always going to raise tensions.
A real geopolitical flashpoint. Okay, let's move on. There was a significant development in India's parliament recently. The Rajya Sabha passed the Protection of Interests in Aircraft Objects Bill 2025. What's the significance of this bill?
This bill is all about bringing Indian law in line with an international agreement called the Cape Town Convention.
The Cape Town Convention, what's that about?
It's a treaty that was adopted back in 2001 by the International Civil Aviation Organization and UNIDROIT. It basically sets out a global framework for dealing with transactions involving expensive movable property, things like aircraft, engines, helicopters, that sort of thing.
So it's about protecting the interests of those who finance or lease these assets.
Exactly. It helps create more certainty and transparency, reduces risk, and ultimately makes it easier for airlines to acquire the aircraft they need.
So it's good for the aviation sector.
Definitely. And India signed the convention back in 2008. So passing this bill is an important step towards implementing it and integrating ourselves more deeply into the global aviation market.
Makes sense. All right, the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, recently announced something called open market operations. Can you explain what that is?
Open market operations, or MOMOs, is basically the RBI buying or selling government bonds in the open market. It's one of the tools they use to manage the money supply in the economy.
So how does that work?
Well, if the RBI wants to increase the money supply, they'll buy government bonds from banks and other financial institutions. This injects money into the system. Conversely, if they want to reduce the money supply, they'll sell bonds, which takes money out of circulation.
So it's like a tap they can use to control the flow of money.
Exactly. And they announced that they'll be injecting 80,000 crore rupees into the banking system through FOMOs.
Okay, so increasing liquidity makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's right.
On a different note, there was some good news from the Central Adoption Resource Authority, or CARA.
Yeah, they had a record year for adoptions. Over 4,500 children were adopted in the last financial year, which is fantastic news.
That's wonderful. Tell us a bit more about CARA for those who might not be familiar with it.
So CARA is a statutory body that works under the Ministry of Women and Child Development. They're the central authority for adoptions in India, both domestic and intercountry. They oversee the entire process, make sure everything's done legally and ethically, and they also work to raise awareness about adoption.
So they're playing a vital role in finding loving homes for children.
Absolutely. And in addition to those adoptions, they also brought over 8,500 newly identified children into the adoption pool, which means there are more children now who have a chance of finding a permanent family.
That's great to hear. Now, sadly, there was also some news about the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund, the PMNRF.
Yes, unfortunately, there was a fire at a factory in Gujarat, and the Prime Minister announced an ex gratia payment from the PMNRF to help the victims and their families.
A timely intervention to provide some relief during a difficult time. Just as a reminder for our listeners, what is the PMNRF and how does it work?
The PMNRF is a fund that was set up by former Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru way back in 1948. It was initially meant to help people displaced during the partition of India.
So a long-standing institution.
Yes. Over the years, its scope has expanded. It's used to provide assistance to people affected by natural calamities like floods, cyclones, earthquakes, and so on. It also provides financial help for medical treatment in certain cases like heart surgery, kidney transplants, cancer treatment.
So it covers a wide range of emergencies and needs.
Exactly. And an important point to remember is that it's entirely funded by public contributions. There's no government funding involved. And all donations to the PMNRF are tax deductible.
A truly national effort to help those in need.
Hmm.
All right, finally, we have the launch of a new portal called the NITI NCAR States Economic Forum portal. Tell us about that.
This portal was jointly developed by NITI Aayog and the National Council of Applied Economic Research, or NCAER. It's basically a one-stop shop for all sorts of data related to the economies of Indian states.
So a treasure trove of information for policymakers and researchers.
Exactly. It covers everything from social indicators to fiscal data, spanning almost 3 decades, from 1991 to 2022 to 2023. It also includes research reports and analyses, all focused on state-level economics.
And what's the objective of this portal?
The idea is to empower states to make better decisions about their finances. They can use the data to analyze their revenue, manage their debt, learn from other states, and ultimately make more informed policy choices.
So promoting data-driven decision-making at the state level.
Percep-
All right, well, that brings us to the end of another deep dive into current affairs. We've covered a lot of ground today. Everything from space missions and economic indicators to defense advancements and international relations. We hope this has been helpful for all you UPSC aspirants out there. Remember, knowledge is power, and staying informed is crucial for success. Now, for a final thought, we talked a lot about India's growing defense exports. What do you think will be the next big thing, the next cutting-edge technology that India can offer the world? Think about it. And as always, if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll be back with more in-depth analysis soon.
Until then, keep learning and stay curious.
See you next time.
Bye for now.
Bye.